Welcome back to the channel. This is the IPP Education Hub. If you are experiencing ED and considering an IPP, or if you are partnering somebody who's going through the IPP experience and you have questions about the journey, then you've come to the right place. In today's video, I want to talk about some of the myths about erectile dysfunction and why they essentially need to die. The truth of the matter is that erectile dysfunction is way more common than people realize, and yet the myths around it can still be pretty brutal in terms of how we generalize men who are suffering. There's a lot of elements of shame and also a lot of misinformation out there, and when you combine all these things together, it can just weigh heavily on a man and really prohibit their ability to live a full and confident life that includes really healthy sexual intimacy. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of those myths, and I'm hoping that what we discuss will provide you a sense of ease if you are experiencing ED, and to let you know that you are absolutely not alone. Now, I think it's important to mention that I believe that all men have or will experience ED in some issue. Now, how is that possible, you might be asking? Well, even if you can get an erection, let's say 90% of the time, what about that other 10%? That other 10% is technically erectile dysfunction. You're not able to perform. However, with an IPP implant, that 10% doesn't exist because the IPP works 100% of the time. Now, for anybody who likes baseball, there's this common saying out there that's, if you were to hit the ball 3 times out of every 10 appearances, then you'd be in the Hall of Fame, right? You'd be one of the greatest hitters of all time just for hitting it 3 out of 10 times. So now I ask you, what if when it came to being intimate, what if you were only able to perform 3 out of every 10 times? Would you consider that Hall of Fame worthy? What if you were able to perform 6 out of every 10 times? They'd probably say in baseball that you were the greatest player of all time, and yet it still wouldn't be 100%. And so to circle back to those men who work 90% of the time, that's right, if you were to hit a home run 9 times out of every 10 plate appearances, then sure, you would be seen as legendary. But with an IPP, we are talking 100% of the time that it works. I've talked in a previous video about the confidence around my IPP and how that's a big part of my life. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I believe that the people who are judgmental are likely those that are having some sort of issue with ED, but they don't know how to talk about it. It's the men who have no concern, no issue, they don't really care what this channel is about. And so for me, I know that ED is something that affects many men, if not all men. And at the end of the day, not all men need an IPP. But if you are someone who is affected by ED, then certainly an IPP may be a resolution that you want to consider. Now, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of people think that ED is something that comes on later in life for men. However, I personally believe that ED can affect men of any age. Now, I've talked in recent videos how I felt like some sort of ED had been affecting me for much of my life. That doesn't mean that I wasn't able to have sexual experiences, but to have really great sexual experiences, those were absolutely limited because of what was going on with my body. And it's important to be aware that ED can happen for a variety of reasons, whether you have a previous injury or your natural biology is not functioning like it should, or maybe you're in a stressful season, which I've talked about in previous videos, and that might be affecting you tremendously as well. But at the end of the day, ED is not a reflection of masculinity, and it's not something to be ashamed of if it's something that you're experiencing. Without getting too deep into this rabbit hole of information, I believe personally that the reason that we are experiencing ED at different ages in today's society comes from a number of factors, whether it's our diets, our lifestyles, or just the world that we're living in. All of these things might be playing part into why certain men are experiencing issues with ED. Now, what's important is that you are not allowing yourself to feel the stigma or judgment from others, and instead recognize that this is just part of the equation. And however, you're not out of options if you are experiencing ED. Now, the second myth that I would like to address is one that I've heard come up before, which is if you can't get an erection, then you're not a real man. I think that's a toxic idea that is really affecting our society in a number of ways. At the end of the day, men, women, whoever, we all are facing things in our lives, and that affects our anatomy, that affects our biology, it affects our mindset. And if you are experiencing ED, then it's important not to internalize it as something that is just wrong with you. Instead, getting help, such as whether it's with an IPP or whatever other solution you might consider, is a sign of strength, not weakness. Now, a third myth that I often hear from men who are struggling with ED is that pills are the only solution to help them. Now, this can be incredibly discouraging for those who are taking the pills because for some men, the pills don't work. And as I've mentioned in other videos, a lot of times these pills come with really bad side effects, such as headaches, sinus congestion, stomach issues, bloody stool, changes in mood, or other things that might be affecting that person after taking the pills. Now, I've talked in other videos about if the pills don't work, then you may want to consider injections. But for those that pills or injections are not going to be a viable option, keep in mind that you're not at the end of the road when it comes to what your options might be. This is why I advocate for the IPP to be a great solution for those who are dealing with ED. Myth number 4 that I've heard from men is this idea that nobody will want them if they have an implant. Now, I can assure you that nobody will know that you have an implant unless you tell them. I've mentioned in other videos that the implant is fully internal, and that whether you're at the gym or whether you're with somebody new and you're having an intimate experience, nobody will be able to notice that you have the implant unless you are upfront and you share with them that information. And yet, if you have an implant, as I've mentioned in other videos, you'll be able to sort of free up your mind from a lot of the performance pressure, and it should allow for a much more rewarding, intimate experience. And so, will that other person know that you have an implant? Not physically, but absolutely, possibly from the performance. But what's important to remember is that most people are going to be drawn to or attracted to confidence, communication, an ability to connect in a way that allows for the person on the other end to feel loved and cared for and not like you're just looking to get yours in that scenario. And so if you're worried about the fact that maybe somebody is going to notice that you have an IPP and that they won't love you, I would actually suggest you to change that myth and switch it, because most of the time that partner is going to be very satisfied with your implant and they will not have any shame or thought around it. And so to piggyback off of that, just the final myth is this idea that if you have an implant, your sex life is over. I would say that once you have an implant, your sex life may restart in a way that it hasn't been in a long time. I've said before on this channel that after getting an IPP, I sort of looked back at my life and said, have I ever had great experiences like this before? Or is this the first time that I'm now actually being able to have really great sexual experiences? Now, this will be different for everybody. So if you were somebody who once upon a time you were able to get really rigid and strong erections, and maybe over time that ability has sort of waned and so you haven't been able to do it as much, then maybe the IPP will sort of just be a back in action kind of thing. But if you're somebody who was never able to truly sustain erections that you're satisfied with or that allowed you to have really great penetrative sex, then the IPP is going to be something that allows you to have sex unlike ever before. And so the idea that an IPP is going to kill your sex life, from firsthand experience, I would say it's the complete opposite. And in a lot of ways, it's like putting a new engine in a Ferrari and saying, wow, I put a lot of miles on the last one, but we switched it out and now we're ready to go with this one too. And so to me, I think that's really exciting. And it really negates this idea that your sex life would be over if you need to get an implant. And so furthermore, I'll just say that if you needed pills or you needed injections and that was leading you to think that your sex life was over, then the IPP might be the next step that you need to get to realize that it is far from over. So if you're dealing with any of these myths, then just know that you're not alone. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I work in marketing, and so I know that there's a lot of marketing out there that's made to make men feel lesser than and inadequate if they are struggling with ED. However, I aim to create resources like this to let you know that you're not alone. And a lot of that stigma that you might be hearing are simply just myths that are coming from people who either don't know better, or maybe it's just language that is getting a lot of momentum, but it's not true. If you are truly struggling with ED, then you're probably going to be a lot like I was, and I was willing to do whatever it took to fix the solution. I didn't really mind what people's opinions were. I wasn't worried about what the general mentality was. I just wanted to fix what was going on with myself. And if you're in the same boat, then I would advocate for you to ignore those myths and talk to your urologist to determine whether or not an IPP might be the best option for you. So just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this channel and also turn on notifications so that you're in the loop every time I release a new video here on the IPP Education Hub. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others.